All right, buckle up because today we are diving deep into clouds in bodies, the essential guide to conscious conception of the new energy children.
Oh yeah, this book is a wild ride. Definitely makes you think about how we come into being in a completely new way.
It blends spirituality and conscious choice in a way I haven't really encountered before.
Exactly.
So, from the very beginning, the book talks about how a good chunk, something like 25% of children being born these days, are what the author, Christelle Jansen, calls new energy children.
Sometimes you hear them called crystals or clear ones too.
Right, right. And it's not just like they're a little more sensitive than other kids.
No, she's saying they actually choose their parents. Can you believe that?
It's a pretty wild concept when you really think about it.
Like they're aware on a soul level even before they're born.
And get this, she even has stories of kids remembering their past lives.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, and remembering their time preparing for life. She calls it the Celestial Soul Academy, and even like experiences they shared with their mothers while they were still in the womb.
Wow, that's incredible. It's like they come in knowing things we can't even imagine.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, and then there's this whole other thing, this vortex idea, which I found totally fascinating.
Oh yeah, the vortex is wild. It's like this energy tunnel that souls travel through before they're born.
Almost like a spiritual birth canal.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is that Jansen says the parent's energy like directly affects this vortex.
So it's not just the physical act of conception, but the whole energetic environment surrounding it.
Yeah, she's saying it influences everything from how easy it is to conceive to the actual pregnancy and birth.
That makes you think about the responsibility we have in bringing a new life into the world in a whole new light.
Right. And she doesn't shy away from the tough stuff either.
What do you mean?
Jansen actually talks about things like miscarriage and abortion.
Oh, wow. And I bet she has a very different take on those.
She does. She presents it all from the perspective of the soul.
So not just the medical or physical explanations.
Right, she goes beyond that.
That's definitely a perspective you don't hear every day.
No, you don't. She shares some pretty intense stories about messages she's received, supposedly from souls who've been through these experiences.
Like channeled messages from souls.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is that she suggests sometimes souls choose to disconnect for their own reasons.
So it's not always about something the parents did or didn't do.
Exactly.
Wow. See, this is what I mean about this book challenging our assumptions. Do you have any examples?
Yeah, there's one where a woman says her son told her he'd actually chosen to come back as a boy after being miscarried as a girl in a previous pregnancy.
That kind of blows your mind, doesn't it? It makes you wonder about things like time and gender and what it all means in the grand scheme of things.
It definitely makes you think.
Okay, so we've covered new energy children choosing their parents, the whole vortex thing, and even touched on miscarriage a little bit.
And we haven't even scratched the surface.
I know, right? There's so much more to uncover in clouds and bodies. Like, she also talks about sexual energy and how important it is for successful conception.
It's not just about the physical act, right?
Yeah.
She likens it to like this powerful creative force.
Exactly. And she's really big on releasing any shame or guilt we might have around sexuality.
It's about owning that part of ourselves, embracing it.
It's like she's saying we need to change the way we think about sex, especially when it comes to creating a new life.
I think that's a message a lot of people need to hear. And it's not just that they choose their parents. It's like these new energy children come in understanding things that most of us, even as adults, are like, what?
I hear you. It's like they've skipped a few grades in soul school or something.
Totally. Jansen even talks about them having this deep grasp of things like, get this, free energy and future technologies.
Okay, now that's what I'm talking about.
Hmm.
The idea that these kids might be the key to solving some of our biggest problems, that's what really gets me fired up.
Right. Imagine a whole generation that just gets it, understands how everything's connected, can tap into energy sources we haven't even dreamed of.
It does sound kind of sci-fi, doesn't it?
Totally. But Jansen backs it up with all these stories, real experiences from these kids and their families.
So it's a good mix of the big picture possibilities and like the nitty-gritty of raising kids who are just wired a little differently.
Yeah, and she doesn't just leave you hanging either.
What do you mean?
Jansen actually gives you guidance on how to connect with these new energy children.
Even before they're born.
Especially before they're born. That's where the telepathic communication comes in.
Oh, right, right.
Yeah.
So learning to go beyond just talking, tapping into something deeper.
Exactly. She believes we're all capable of telepathy,
Hmm.
that we're born with these, she calls them angel senses.
But we kind of forget how to use them as we grow up.
Yeah, we get conditioned out of it.
Yeah.
But Jansen's like, hey, we can get that back.
I love that. So how do we do it? How do we bridge that gap between like the physical and the spiritual?
Well, one of the tools Jansen talks about is conscious breathing.
Breathing. Really?
Oh, yeah, she's all about it.
Yeah.
Said it raises our vibration, helps us tune into those subtle frequencies where we can actually sense the soul's energy.
I can see how that might sound a little out there to some people.
For sure.
But when you think about it, the intention behind it, like creating that welcoming space, that energetic connection, it makes a lot of sense.
It's about alignment,
Yeah.
getting on the same wavelength. And this whole idea of choice, that's huge for Jansen. It's not just about us choosing to have a kid. It's like the soul is choosing us too.
Oh, interesting. A two-way street.
Exactly. And that choice continues even after the baby's born. Jansen really stresses how important it is to create a nurturing environment, not just physically, but energetically, for this new soul.
So, like, paying attention to the energy we're bringing to parenting.
Yes. And being willing to let go of our own limiting beliefs.
Like, questioning the way we were raised, the shoulds and shouldn'ts that might not actually serve the soul's purpose.
Exactly. And that's where Jansen's background comes in really handy, being an acupuncturist and a Qigong master. She knows a lot about energy flow in the body.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. So how does she apply that to conception?
Well, she talks a lot about releasing stagnant energy, clearing blockages, creating this sense of harmony within the body.
Which, let's be honest, most of us could use a little more of these days, right? Especially with how stressful life can be.
For sure. And of course, she dives deep into the whole sexual energy thing.
Because for her, it's all connected, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And you know what I appreciate about her approach? She presents sexuality as something sacred. It's this source of creativity, this life force.
I love that she's reclaiming it from all the BS, all the baggage and hang-ups our culture throws at us around sex.
Yeah, and it's not just about the act itself, it's about how we feel about our bodies.
Yeah, like cultivating a sense of self-love and acceptance.
Exactly. Feeling good in your own skin so that when you do come together with a partner, it's from this place of wholeness and joy.
It becomes less about the mechanics and more about the connection, right?
Exactly. Like this beautiful dance of energy. Hearing you say that makes me think about the book's title, Clouds and Bodies.
It's such a cool title, isn't it?
It is, and it's such a good metaphor for how we're just passing through these physical forms.
Like our souls are these vast, ever-changing things, just like clouds.
Exactly. And just like clouds, our potential is limitless.
One of the things I really appreciate about this book is how it brings together these old spiritual ideas with modern science and like real people's experiences.
It's kind of refreshing, isn't it?
Totally. It's like she's saying, what if we've barely scratched the surface of what's possible?
Right. When it comes to life and birth and souls and all of that.
Exactly. And that open-mindedness, that willingness to explore, I think that's what this whole deep dive is about.
For sure.
And, it's especially important when we're talking about things like miscarriage and abortion.
Yeah, those are such sensitive topics.
And often so shrouded in like grief and taboo.
It's hard to even talk about them sometimes.
It is. But Jansen approaches these things with so much sensitivity, like she's really inviting us to consider a different perspective.
One that might offer some comfort or understanding.
Yeah, and those channeled messages she talks about, supposedly from souls who've experienced these things.
They really make you think, don't they?
They really do. It challenges everything we think we know about life and death and the choices we make.
Or that are made for us, right? Like, how much control do we really have?
Exactly. And then there's this whole other layer of, like, Jansen's perspective on sexual energy.
Which is a whole other can of worms in our culture.
Right. We are so bombarded with all these messed up ideas about sex.
Total.
And she just comes in and says, nope, this is a sacred force, a source of vitality and joy.
It's about time someone said it.
I know, right? And it's so important because it lets us approach conception from this place of empowerment, not shame.
Like owning our sexuality and all its creative potential.
Exactly. It's like she's saying, our bodies are not the enemy. Our sexual energy is not something to be afraid of.
It's about understanding it, working with it, and that's where those exercises she gives are so helpful. The visualizations, the breath work, it gives you tools,
Yeah, it's not just all this airy-fairy talk. There's actual stuff you can do.
Exactly. Okay, can we talk about the anecdotes in this book for a second?
Oh my gosh, yes. The stories are wild.
They're so good. They really bring all these concepts to life. Like that one about the woman whose son said he chose to come back as a boy after being miscarried as a girl.
All right. Or Jansen's own daughter, Skyvelia.
Who supposedly chose her own parents.
I know. It makes you wonder how much these souls really do know and plan before they get here.
And then there's that whole thing with the jinn. I mean, come on, that's next level.
Right. Like that one really pushes the boundaries of what we think is possible.
It definitely makes you question things.
For sure. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into clouds and bodies, what's your biggest takeaway? What really stuck with you?
That's a good question. I think for me, it's that reminder that we're not just these physical beings just going through the motions.
Mm,
We're souls having a human experience.
I love that.
And that journey, it starts way before we even get here.
Right.
So maybe, just maybe, we have a lot more say in things than we realize.
It's a powerful thought, isn't it? That we have this ability to choose, to create our own reality, even before we're born.
Totally.
Hmm.
And maybe if we start to open up to that possibility, who knows what we might create.
Exactly. And that's what I hope people take away from this conversation. A sense of wonder, of possibility, and maybe even a little more intention as they move through the world. Because who knows, maybe by embracing some of these ideas, we can create a more conscious and fulfilling experience, not just for ourselves, but for generations to come.
Couldn't agree more.
It's been a wild ride, this deep dive into clouds and bodies.
It really has.
And it's definitely got me thinking about things in a whole new way.
Me too. It's definitely a perspective shifter.
Thanks for joining me on this journey. It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
Likewise, always happy to dive deep into these topics.